connection meadow. And so at last he sank a shaft 60 feet deep, rigged up a corrugated iron engine house with a winding engine, and lowered his men one at a time down the shaft in a big bucket. The whole affair was rickety, amateurish, and twopenny. The name Connection Meadow was forgotten within 3 months. Everybody knew the place as Throttle Ha'penny. "What?" said a collier to his wife. "Have we got no coal? You better get a bit from Throttle Ha'penny." "Nay," replied the wife, "I'm sure I shan't. I'm sure I shan't burn that muck and smother myself with white ash." It was in the early Throttle Ha'penny days that Mrs. Houghton died. James Houghton cried, and put a black band on his Sunday silk hat. But he was too feverishly busy at Throttle Ha'penny, selling his hundredweights of ash-pit fodder, as the natives called it, to realise anything else. He had 3 men and 2 boys working his pit, besides a superannuated old man driving the winding engine. And in spite of all jeering, he flourished. Shabby old coal carts rambled up behind the new connection and filled from the pit bank. The coal improved a little in quality. It was cheap and it was handy. James could sell at last 50 or 60 tons a week, for the stuff was easy getting. And now at last he was actually handling money. He saw millions ahead. This went on for more than a year. A year after the death of Mrs. Houghton, Miss Frost became ill and suddenly died. Again James Houghton cried and trembled. But it was Throttle Ha'penny that made him tremble. He trembled in all his limbs at the touch of success. He saw himself making noble provision for his only daughter. But alas, it is wearying to repeat the same thing over and over. First the Board of Trade began to make difficulties. Then there was a fault in the seam. Then the roof of Throttle Ha'penny was so loose and soft, James could not afford timber to hold it up. In short, when his daughter Alvina was about 27 years old, Throttle Ha'penny closed down. There was a sale of poor machinery, and James Houghton came home to the dark, gloomy house, to Miss Pinnegar and Alvina. It was a pinched, dreary house. James seemed down for the last time, but Miss Pinnegar persuaded him to take the shop again on Friday evening. For the rest, faded and peaked, he hurried shadowily down to the club. End of chapter 1. Chapter 1 of The Lost Girl. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tony Foster. The Lost Girl by D.H. Lawrence. Chapter 1. The Decline of Manchester House. Take a mining townlet like Woodhouse, with a population of 10,000 people, and 3 generations behind it. This space of 3 generations argues a certain well-established society. The old county has fled from the sight of so much disembowelled coal to flourish on mineral rights in regions still idyllic. Remains one great and inaccessible magnate, the local coal owner, 3 generations old, and clambering on the bottom step of the county, kicking off the mass below. Rule him out. A well-established society in Woodhouse, full of fine shades, ranging from the dark of coal dust to grit of stonemason and sawdust of timber merchant, through the lustre of lard and butter and meat, to the perfume of the chemist and the disinfectant of the doctor, on to the serene gold tarnish of bank managers, cashiers for the firm, clergymen and such like, as far as the automobile refulgence of the general manager of all the collieries. Here the ne plus ultra. The general manager lives in the shrubberied seclusion of the so-called manor. The genuine hall, abandoned by the county, has been taken over as offices by the firm. Here we are then. A vast substratum of colliers, a thick sprinkling of tradespeople intermingled with small employers of labour, and diversified by elementary schoolmasters and nonconformist clergy. A higher layer of bank managers, rich millers and well-to-do ironmasters. episcopal clergy and the managers of colliers, then the rich and sticky cherry of the local coal owner glistening over all. Such the complicated social system of a small industrial town in the Midlands of England in this year of grace 1920. But let us go back a little. Such it was in the last calm year of plenty, 1913. A calm year of plenty. But one chronic and dreary malady, that of the odd women. Why, in the name of all prosperity, should every class but the lowest in such a society hang overburdened with Dead Sea fruit of odd women, unmarried, unmarriageable women, called old maids? Why is it that every tradesman, every schoolmaster, every bank manager and every clergyman produces 1, 2, 3 or more old maids? Do the middle classes, particularly the lower middle classes, give birth to more girls than boys? Or do the lower middle class men assiduously climb up or down in marriage, thus leaving their true partners stranded? Or are middle class women very squeamish in their choice of husbands? However it be, it is a tragedy. Or perhaps it is not. Perhaps these unmarried women of the middle classes are the famous sexless workers of our ant-industrial society, of which we hear so much. Perhaps all they lack is an occupation, in short, a job. But perhaps we might hear their own opinion before we lay the law down. In Woodhouse there was a terrible crop of old maid among the nobs, the tradespeople and the clergy. The whole town of women, colliers' wives and all, held its breath as it saw a chance of one of these daughters of comfort and woe getting off. They flocked to the well-to-do weddings with an intoxication of relief. For let class jealousy be what it may, a woman hates to see another woman left stalely on the shelf without a chance. They all wanted the middle-class girls to find husbands. Every one wanted it, including the girls themselves. Hence the dismalness. Now James Houghton had only one child, his daughter Alvina. Surely Alvina Houghton... But let us retreat to the early 80s, when Alvina was a baby, or even further back, to the palmy days of James Houghton. In his palmy days, James Houghton was crème de la crème of Woodhouse society. The house of Houghton had always been well-to-do, tradespeople, we must admit, but after a few generations of affluence, tradespeople acquire a distinct cachet. Now James Houghton, at the age of 28, inherited a splendid business in Manchester goods in Woodhouse. He was a tall, thin, elegant young man with side whiskers, genuinely refined, somewhat in the Bulwer style. He had a taste for elegant conversation and elegant literature and elegant Christianity. A tall, thin, brittle young man, rather fluttering in his manner, full of facile ideas, and with a beautiful speaking voice, most beautiful. Withal, of course, a tradesman. He courted a small, dark woman, older than himself, daughter of a Derbyshire squire. He expected to get at least £10,000 with her, in which he was disappointed, for he only got 800. Being of a romantic commercial nature, he never forgave her, but always treated her with the most elegant courtesy. To see him peel and prepare an apple for her was an exquisite sight. But that peeled and quartered apple was her portion. This elegant Adam of commerce gave Eve her own back, nicely cored, and had no more to do with her. Meanwhile, Alvina was born. Before all this, however, before his marriage, James Houghton had built Manchester House. It was a vast square building, vast, that is, for Woodhouse, standing on the main street and high road of the small but growing town. The lower front consisted of 2 fine shops, one for Manchester goods, one for silk and woollens. This was James Houghton's commercial poem. For James Houghton was a dreamer, and something of a poet, commercial, be it understood. He liked the novels of George MacDonald and the fantasies of that author extremely. He wove one continual fantasy for himself, a fantasy of commerce. He dreamed of silks and poplins, luscious in texture and of unforeseen exquisiteness. He dreamed of carriages of the county arrested before his windows, of exquisite women, ruffling, charmed, entranced to his counter. And charming, entrancing, he served them his lovely fabrics. which only he and they could sufficiently appreciate. His fame spread, until Alexandra, Princess of Wales, and Elizabeth, Empress of Austria, the two best-dressed women in Europe, floated down from heaven to the shop in Woodhouse, and sallied forth to show what could be done by purchasing from James Houghton. We cannot say why James Houghton failed to become the Liberty or the Snelgrove of his day. Perhaps he had too much imagination. Be that as it may, in those early days when he brought his wife to her new home, his window on the Manchester side was a foam and a May blossom of muslins and prints. His window on the London side was an autumn evening of silks and rich fabrics. What wife could fail to be dazzled? But she, poor darling from her stone hall in stony Derbyshire, was a little bit repulsed by the man's dancing in front of his stock, like David before the ark. The home to which he brought her was a monument. In the great bedroom over the shop he had his furniture built of solid mahogany, oh, too solid. No doubt he hopped or skipped himself with satisfaction into the monstrous matrimonial bed. It could only be mounted by means of a stool and chair. But the poor, secluded little woman, older than he, must have climbed up with a heavy heart, to lie and face the gloomy bastille of mahogany, the great cupboard opposite, or to turn wearily sideways to the great cheval mirror, which performed a perpetual and hideous bow before her grace. Such furniture! It could never be removed from the room. The little child was born in the 2nd year, and then James Houghton decamped to a small, half-furnished bedroom at the other end of the house, where he slept on a rough board and played the anchorite for the rest of his days. His wife was left alone with her baby and the built-in furniture. She developed heart disease as a result of